Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek Program at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are in the West Arboretum because it's right next to our parking lot, and it's part of the garden that people barely ever see, and they normally take for granted, which is very convenient because today we've got a program for you. Aucuba Matata, where we will be talking about Japanese aucuba, very much considered to be a parking lot plant, very much considered to be overused and boring, but it is not those things. It is a fascinating plant. It's a very useful and versatile plant, and our director, Mark Weathington, absolutely loves them. Mark will be joining us at the end for questions. It's about 30 minutes long, so you can expect to see him for questions at the end. We're going to learn all about aucubas. We're going to explore their variety. We're going to explore their uses, and it's just going to be a wonderful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will go ahead and get started with Mark's presentation on aucubas.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about one of these subjects that I sometimes get made fun of with my other plant nerd friends, because it's one of the most pedestrian plants. It's Aucuba japonica, sometimes known as the gold dust plant. I had visited the national collection holder in the UK, Linda Eggins, who was a delightful woman. I was recounting that experience to the head of the National Collections Scheme in the UK. We were at a conference somewhere in another country, and I said, "Oh, I've just visited somebody who holds a national collection. I visited Linda Eggins." And she goes, "Oh, Aucuba, kind of a parking lot plant." And I thought, one, but two, I said, yes, nurserymen sell a lot of Aucuba. It's a popular plant, and that's probably why so often we kind of poo-poo the Aucubas. But they really are great plants, easy to care for, easy to grow. I can't say enough good things about them. It's an interesting group in that they're all Asian. They're all from kind of Southeast Asia to temperate Asia, and there's maybe 10 species, probably more. It's one of the only plants I've ever looked at in a flora. The Flora of China gives a whole description and then basically says, there's somebody doing some work on these in Japan, and this is all probably going to change because these are poorly understood. And yeah, they are. And other than Aucuba japonica, the gold dust plant we all know and love, almost no other ones are in cultivation at all. Really just a very few handful are. And it's kind of unfortunate because there's some really interesting plants in there. I did get in touch with that Japanese person. He said in Taiwan, he's sure that there's a third species besides Aucuba chinensis and Aucuba japonica. There may be two new species, and Aucuba chinensis might not be there. And he said, but he ran out of money for that work, so he's not doing any more Aucuba work. Unfortunate, but we're still looking at them and working on them. I gotta say, when I learned about gold dust plant Aucuba, I was ambivalent towards them. As I learned more about plants and got to be more knowledgeable about plants, I liked them less and less. And in fact, when I got here, I remember talking to the director at the time, Denny Werner, and we were both scratching our heads over, why do so many people like this plant? Just do not get it. Why do they like this plant so much? And we had a lot of them here, and we grew more. And I went to Japan, and somebody who had been here at the Arboretum before me had really liked Aucuba. And so one of the nurserymen we visited was very excited, and he had propagated a whole bunch of new ones for me and had me bring them back. And I got to really appreciate them more and more just because they're tough, easy plants. They bring some brightness to the shade garden. Just simple plants. So the typical Aucuba that most of us know, it's one like Crotonifolia or maybe like this Cecil Alice, where you get a lot of, you have these kind of mid-sized evergreen leaves, green stems, and then heavy spotting with yellow, almost splashing or streaking on some of them, like this Cecil Alice. And when they're not happy, let's face it, they can look a little ragged. But when they are happy, they're just bright little spots in the garden. Now, Aucuba, like hollies, are male and female, and there's often not a lot of great information about which ones are male, which ones are female. Males will have kind of short, kind of compressed stems, flower stems with real burgundy flowers. They're actually quite beautiful when you notice them, but you're not going to notice them if you're running through the gardens. The female flowers are very similar. They tend to be a little bit more elongated. And if you have a female, like this Cecil Alice, you'll get fruit on there. Now, they flower in late winter, usually, and you don't really get fruit on them until the following winter often. Sometimes they'll form fruit earlier, but these will turn bright red. They'd be super showy. They are super showy, except they're hidden mostly underneath the leaves because they flower at the tops and then they leaf up beyond that. In general, Aucuba japonica will get to be 6 to 8 feet tall. It can get taller with age, but there are some exceptions to that. One that we introduced right here beside me had been growing in our Japanese garden, nestled next to a bench for, before I was here. So more than 17, 18 years now. And we never had a name on it. It was just grown as male form. And even though I've come to love Aucuba, sometimes you take these kinds of things for granted. And I didn't pay much attention until one day I was out and it was in full bloom. And it's a male. And it was really, really showy in bloom. I loved it. And then I realized, I was like, hey, we've never pruned this plant. It's not 6 to 8 feet tall. It's about 2 feet tall and maybe 3 or 4 feet wide. And like I said, we have never, ever pruned it. And all of a sudden I was like, this is a really nice dwarf Aucuba. So we named it, we didn't name it actually. Somebody else named it and then said, hey, hope you don't mind, we named this plant of yours. They named it Mr. Wonderful. I'm not sure I love the name, but it is a great male Aucuba. And when you're planting Aucubas, you do want to get male and female, so you do get those berries because they're quite showy. Now the fruits are kind of similar to our native flowering dogwood. And at one point, this evergreen shrub from Asia was classified in the same family as dogwoods, Cornaceae. It has since been split off, and depending on who you talk to, it is either in the Garryaceae, where there are two species, Aucuba and Garrya. I love Garryaceae because it's like, everything else is like, Magnoliaceae and Melastomaceae, and then you have Garryaceae. Something about that just cracks me up. Garrya is only native to like the West Coast down into Mexico and the Caribbean, and Aucuba is only native to Asia. Seems like a weird pairing. There's nothing about them that really looks the same. Flowers, fruit, foliage. So some folks split this off from Garryaceae and put it in its own family, Aucubaceae. It all depends on who you, what taxonomist you like. So that speckled foliage is typically what you see. I showed you some of those common ones, Crotonifolia and Cecil Alice. Around us, perhaps other than the really old ones like Sulfurea, Crotonifolia, Marmorata, which all look pretty much the same. The most popular one that's being grown is actually, in my mind, probably the best of the speckled ones. This is one called Hosoba Hoshifu. I looked up what Hoshifu was at one point, and I can't remember. Hosoba means narrow. And this does have a much narrower leaf than, the more typical forms. It only grows about 6 to 8 feet tall. What I really like it is so many of the other heavily variegated forms kind of can be almost too variegated, and they look a little bit chlorotic or yellow, whereas Hosoba hoshifu keeps a really nice glossy dark green and then those yellow spots on it. I just think it's a really, really handsome shrub, Hosoba hoshifu, Aucuba japonica. Now, just because it has spots, there is a variation. People say, oh, Aucubas are all the same, but, these two guys are not the same thing, are they? These are some pretty different animals here. This monster is a plant we got under the name Tsuruga benton, and the foliage looks pretty similar to Tsuruga benton. It's a little more variable than some other ones, almost more kind of splashing, streaking than spotting. But Tsuruga benton is a nice, compact 4-foot plant, whereas this quickly grew to about 8 feet tall. There is nothing else that we know of like it that'll have leaves this large and is this heavily variegated. We haven't put a name on it yet, but if you have a name to suggest, pop it in the chat and let us know, and maybe we'll use that name, and maybe we'll send you a plant as a thank you. It's one of the nice things about Aucuba is while there's not always a lot of cutting material, it does root very, very easily. In fact, a lot of these pieces that I cut for this, we may bring back to the nursery and stick as cuttings. So you can see they're quite different. So we were growing this, and then we had this seedling from this plant that we have in our records as Aucuba japonica, not Tsuruga benton. And it's this plant which has, we'll see if it gets larger leaves as it gets older, very much that coarse serration that Tsuruga benton, not Tsuruga benton has, as opposed to this Mr. Wonderful with very, very small serrations along the leaf. And it is spotted. It's not a solid green one. There's a spot. There's a spot. Some couple spots there. It's it's mostly green, but a few little spots. Who knows? This may be nothing, but we'll watch it because we like to see what they do. So, this is what we think of as Aucuba japonica, but there's a whole lot more, and we're going to explore some of the different ones that are out there. I will say, if you're interested in Aucuba, there are really just 2 books that I know of about this. From here in Raleigh, the Raleigh area, somebody who is very near and dear to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum's heart, actually a graduate student of Dr. J.C. Ralston, is Larry Hatch. Unfortunately, Larry just recently passed away, but he has some of the most comprehensive information about cultivars. And this is a book he wrote. It's also online behind a paywall, so you do have to pay for the book if you want to get it in digital or hardback form. And this is just for Aucuba. And as you go through here, you'll see that quite a few of them will say photographed or only seen at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum or at our sister garden, Juniper Level Botanic Garden. One of the things that Larry really tried to get down into the weeds about was what are some of these historic plants and how many of what we're growing we have a kind of Latinized name like limbata. There's a Japanese name like Hime Kikufurin. There's a American Englishized name like Eclipse. Are these all the same? Are they different? And he would try and measure what percentage of leaf was variegated on there. Unfortunately, that can be difficult because depending on how much light some of these get, the variegation really can change, whether it gets more light or less light. And many plants, not so much this one, but many plants, you'll see the speckling on the outside, and where it shades itself interior, it'll be much more green. This one doesn't really do that. Now, if you like that history, that wonderful woman I mentioned, Linda Eggins, wrote a book. She and Larry Hatch communicated when I first reached out to her about visiting the National Collection. First thing she asked was, do I know Larry Hatch? And I said, oh, yes, we're very well. So she wrote a book called A Virgin for 80 Years, Aucuba, an Overlooked Treasure. And I don't know if it's overlooked since it is so common, but maybe it's overlooked as a treasure. The title comes from the fact that when Aucuba were first brought to England and to the West from Japan, there was only the female version. Slip of the tongue there. Only the female version. And so it never fruited. They never got fruit on it. And it wasn't till 80 years later when more were collected and brought in that they actually saw the fruit on Aucuba. So, sex sells, a virgin for 80 years. But she wrote this great book. She went to Japan to study them in the wild. She was a really wonderful woman. All right, we're going to talk about some other types besides these speckled types. Some that maybe are a little bit more for the connoisseur. What's something a little different? But they're all great plants. Okay, now besides the typical speckled gold dust plant, there are other forms. You don't see them quite as often. This is one we actually just named the other day. You can see these rippled leaves with this kind of chartreuse yellow in the centers. This is actually a sport of another plant. There's a plant that is very white. It's contorted leaves and has white variegation. It's called hakurayu, which means kind of white dragon on there. This was a sport that had kind of the opposite variegations and this creamy. So we call it golden dragon, just to kind of pay homage to that. But the whole plant grows a little bit contorted, twisty stems, and then these kind of wrinkled leaves. We mentioned the flowers earlier. I think hopefully we can get a good shot on those flowers. These are male flowers. If you look at them closely, you see the 4 little yellow dots. Those are the male parts on there, the stamens. So this is a little different than your typical Aucuba. Now, there are also a lot of Aucubas that kind of fall into a range somewhere between speckling and spotting, and those plants you'll get almost solid gold leaves. You'll get just all kinds of different things. Normally on most plants, if you see something like that, it's a terrible variegated plant. It's going to go all green on you. But a lot of the Aucubas will do that and never go all green. They may have a couple of all green leaves, but really they won't. This is one called Cecil Alice, which is more of the 4 to 5 foot tall type. Smaller rounded leaves. You saw some with long leaves, smaller rounded leaves, but very heavily variegated. And it's one that sometimes you can find. A couple of a little bit odder ones. So here we have one called Salted Pepper. We're not sure how big it's going to get, but it looks like one that's going to stay fairly small, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. But it's kind of it's got a thin white edge and kind of a silvery wash over the entire leaf. This is the first time it'll flower for us, so we're not sure if it's a male or female. And another little dwarf one, this one is one called Hessetera. Hessetera is one. This is from Kyoto region, and again, it's got kind of creamy yellow white striped across the leaf. Different, yes. If you like that kind of thing, it's the kind of thing you like. Kind of a neat thing. Now, this one just looks like a green Aucuba. This is Natsu no Kumo, and this is one that I think is one of the best Aucuba. I love this thing. In the spring, when the new growth comes out, it is pure white. Every bit of it is just pure white. And then over the course of a few weeks, it turns to green. If you get it growing really vigorously, you can trim it back in early summer and have it flush again, but it'll go from white to green pretty quickly then. You know, that white doesn't last forever, but it lasts longer than most flowering plants, flowering shrubs. And from a distance, you will have no idea that this isn't a plant that's in full flower. So I'm here in my favorite place to be, surrounded by my aucubas. You know, I can kind of do it's the Homer Simpson fade into the bushes here. People don't realize that this is when they can't find me in my office. That's what I'm doing, is hiding in the shrubs out here. It's a good place to get to work. We have Wi-Fi outside, so it's perfect. But, you know, talking about these gold dust plants, they're interesting in that they're one of the few plants that in the wild, they are speckled and spotted in the wild, but not all the time. Now, Aucuba japonica, you can find these speckled forms, but you can also find solid green forms. The plant up here above me that's swallowing me has these great narrow leaves. It gets to be a pretty good sized plant. It's one that's, how many names does it have? You know, sometimes as a cultivar, it's named lancifolia or longifolia. Sometimes that's put as a variety, longifolia or lancifolia. Sometimes you see it named lance leaf and all kinds of different names. And they probably are many different forms of this that have arisen in different ways, but at the end of the day, they are all pretty much the same with this long, narrow leaf. Kind of an interesting one here, keep me company on my right, is one of the green leaf ones that's more commonly found, and it actually came to the U.S. from England by J.C. Ralston. And it's Aucuba japonica Roseanne or Rosanne. And this was brought in as an exceptional female, a really heavy fruiting female. And you still see it touted that way. I have found this to be one of the shyest to fruit of all the aucubas. And we have so many that it should fruit. So I don't know if somehow it does better in the UK, or if JC stumbled across this in a nursery on a particularly good year, or what. But it's a mid-sized shrub, and it's got kind of the rounded, smaller leaves. The leaves will get larger than what you see here. This is a really old plant, and it's just kind of just putting out little bits of growth each year. The National Arboretum not too long ago released a great little dwarf green one. This is one called Petite Jade. It's only about 2 or 3 feet tall and maybe 3 or 4 feet wide. Got kind of the typical, somewhat wide-ish Aucuba leaf, which a lot of the dwarf ones have a narrower, less serrate leaf. Petite Jade was grown at the National Arboretum for many years before they named it, and it was a male, but 2 of our 3 plants have fruit forming on them now. So as Greg Page said earlier when we were talking about another plant, you know, it's like they say in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. Sometimes these male and female plants, you know, change. And we like that for them. We support that with them. Now, Aucuba mostly are zone 7 plants. You can stretch some of them up a little bit farther north, but if you're really solid zone 6, possibly even zone 5B, there is a form of Aucuba japonica that grows far north in Japan. It's called Aucuba japonica variety borealis. So, you know, borealis, meaning north. This is one called Aucuba japonica variety borealis Honshu. There's one called bored female. These tend to be more dwarf shrubs. They tend to have these narrower foliage, but they grow great, and they will really stretch where you can grow Aucuba a little bit farther north. Now, while I'm talking about these green leaf ones, I do want to mention that there are about 10 species of Aucuba. Aucuba japonica you can find easily in the trade. If you go to specialty places, you might find Aucuba himalaica, which has a narrow leaf, or Aucuba chinensis possibly. Aucuba chinensis is where the botanists have thrown everything that they didn't know how to identify. Comes from very narrow leaf forms with very thin leaves to this plant, which the leaves can get over a foot long, well over a foot long, and can be, just as stiff as can be and huge and the plants can go from those thinner leaf ones are 5, 6, 8 feet tall to this, which we don't call Aucuba chinensis, even though the flora of China does. We call it Aucuba omiensis from Mount Ome, and this will grow into a 20+ foot tall tree with a single trunk, and there's no way these are the same plants. There's another large leaf species that we just recently collected in Vietnam called Aucuba Eriobatrifolia, so the loquat-leafed Aucuba, which gets quite big. And I was really excited. A few years back, we were in Gansu, or kind of between Shaanxi and Gansu, and we came across a small little Aucuba with little white dots on the leaves, and I was like, that's gotta be Aucuba albopunctifolia. I was so excited I've only knew it as a name. So we've got some Aucuba albopunctifolia going. It's been slow to get really going, but we're starting to be able to take some cuttings and spread it around. And really hope that we're going to be able to do some research soon to start figuring out what of these things are different species. We grow 5 or so different species, but we grow quite a few things that were just Aucuba with a question mark after them because we don't know what they are. I guess we could put chinensis on all of them. But that's the other thing that I'm loving about Aucuba is that there's still so much to learn about them, even though we feel like we know everything about the old gold dust plant. All right, so I've convinced you that Aucuba are great plants, I hope. So now that you're growing, how do you grow them? Where do you grow them? So this is one called Golden King. It's a real popular one. It'll get to be that normal 6 to 8 foot tall, relatively large leaves, heavy serrations, just a really nice Aucuba. This is what most people think of when they think of Aucuba. So Aucuba are great for shade. They thrive in shade, and once they're established, they will really take pretty dry shade. We have had a hot summer. I've got a hydrangea in front of me that's just looking ragged this time of year. There are leaves that are falling that shouldn't be falling yet. It was a brutal summer. And you look at this plant, it looks just fine. It's kind of why it's called a parking lot plant. They will tolerate more sun. They do like some more water the more sun they get. And if you've got one of those really heavy variegated one with large patches of gold, you'll get burn spots in those gold sectored areas. What do you do with them? You don't have to do much. Every once in a while you'll get a shoot that comes up a little bit too tall. You just come in and you trim that out. If you like rooting plants, you can take this, put a little bit of rooting hormone, probably don't even need that, stick it in some moist soil, and it'll root. They're just really easy. And they're one of the most satisfying plants to propagate because, we'll stick a bunch in little cell packs, and while everything else that we've stuck, other things don't have a root on them, these are lifting the whole shoot out of the cell pack because these big old chunky roots are in there. They're really, really satisfying to root. Issues you can get with them, they can get some scale. It tends not to be a problem when they're outdoors, when you're growing them in a greenhouse or even as a house plant, which I learned these as kind of a house plant, outdoor plant. You can get some scale, and what'll happen is the leaves will kind of crinkle up, and if you look under there, you'll see a little white kind of fuzzy scale, and you can just really just wipe that off. You don't need to spray it with anything. But unless you get one of the contorted leaf types, you really don't have to worry about that once they go out in the garden. Now, every once in a while, for whatever reason, you will get canker on there and a whole stem will turn black and you'll get a big chunkier stem that turns black. And more often than not, even if you prune that out, your plant is going downhill. I don't know what causes that. I've seen plants that look like they're staying too wet, and that would be what I would think is the normal reason for that. But I've also seen plants that are just bone dry that are doing that. If you start seeing that black on there, I mean, it looks like somebody torched it. You see that, prune that out, prune a good foot below where you're seeing that. And then if you start to see it on the rest of your plant, rip your plant out and just get another one. It's just not worth, it will die on you, and there's no reason to fight that battle. Now, if you have one of these other types of aucubas, and this is one called Maigetsu. It has these incredible white streaks or creamy yellow white streaks on the leaves. It actually, I don't know if you'll be able to catch this. If you look at the stems will be striped and the petioles of the leaves will be striped with that creamy white as well. A very interesting chimera. But this one is not very stable, and that's because you've got that white going up the stems, but if a stem grows from the green part of the stem, it will not have any of that white, and it will never have any of that white. And the non-variegated parts will grow quicker. So when you have a plant like this, or you have one of those splotched ones, and you're seeing branches that are coming out that are entirely green, what you need to do is come in there and prune them out. Just prune them completely out. Now I'm gonna tell Blake I can't continue on because now that I've started, I don't want to stop getting these out. One of the cool things about this is when you have that chimera, that variegation that comes up through the stem, that means it's in the L2 layer, and the L2 layer is where the flowers and the fruit form. So if you get fruit on these, and you'll be able to see on the fruit, there'll be white markings, creamy markings on that red fruit. You can actually sow those, and you'll often get variegated plants that may be great, may be terrible, but they can be some cool things. So I hope you like these aucubas. I certainly do. We have about 100 of them here, 100 different ones. We probably have the largest collection in North America, and we're just constantly kind of watching them and seeing what's good, seeing which ones are actually the same, which ones are not. But there's a lot more to them than the old gold dust plants. So I hope I've gotten you to at least give them a second look out there. So happy to answer any questions for you.
Awesome. That was wonderful. There was a lot to learn about aucubas there. We still have more to learn about aucubas. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to go behind the camera, and we are going to take a look at a few more. Oh, and by the way, Mark's here.
I've gotten used to looking at the screen for the last 20 minutes, so I got to remember to look at y'all. All right, I have already got a correction to what I said there. I was talking about some of the species. I was talking about Aucuba omiensis, and I never can remember if it's Aucuba omiensi or Aucuba omiensis that I like to call it, which the Flora of China says is the same thing as Aucuba chinensis, which is this thing. So I was looking up whether it was omiensi or omiensis in Plants of the World online, and lo and behold, they are not saying Aucuba omiensis is the same thing as chinensis. They have separated them out. So finally, the experts agree with me. So the big differences between these, I mentioned both of these in the talk. I showed a little bit of Aucuba omiensis. This leaf is about twice as thick as this chinensis leaf. Much different color, much different texture to it, different serrations. And this grows into a tree, and this is a shrub. So this is that Aucuba chinensis. It's still probably not there's still probably a lot of things lumped into this because it's everything from these extremely narrow leaves to these big leaves. This has been the best growing Aucuba chinensis we've ever tried, and it's one that we've named just Yangmingshan, which is where it was collected in Taiwan, is on the mountain Yangmingshan, which is right at the very north tip of the island on a mountain there. So we really like this. Most of the chinensis we've grown have been kind of crappy plants, but this one's been really good. And since I mentioned that, I didn't want to cut. I mentioned also as a species Aucuba albopunctifolia and how excited I was to find this plant. It has been painfully slow growing. We've propagated some, but that's mostly from this one that was at my house that a deer decided to use it as an antler rub. I don't know why they would take a plant this big to rub antlers on, but they did. So I took all the pieces that were broken off and Sophia here rooted them for us. But you can see it's got these small leaves and these little spots that are really translucent. If I'm looking at it from the back and, can see almost through the leaf with it there. We'll see how it is as a garden plant. It's growing easily. It's just growing very, very slowly. And it's very small, but it's a cool thing. Now, I mentioned propagation. Oh, wait, one more. I want to show one more just because I like it. One more cutting, because it's so different. Most of the narrow-leafed aucubas, Aucuba japonicas, are plain green for whatever reason. I'm not sure why that is. This is another painfully slow-growing one. It's narrow-leafed. I got it from the UK collection holder, Linda Eggins. And it was one that her husband, I believe, named February Star because he got it from the phenomenal plantsman and gardener Christopher Lloyd, who was known as the February Star. It's not a great going plant. I think we may have killed ours off here at the Arboretum. It's really not fantastic. I have one at home, finally seems to have settled in. So we're now I can be able to propagate it and bring it back to the Arboretum because that's what everybody here wants, is for us to have more Aucuba here. But there wasn't much to cut. So we will cut this into several pieces and use it. So talking about propagation, Aucuba propagation is easy and very satisfying. This is one from Japan called Daisuke's Tiger, spelled Daisuke, but Daisuke's Tiger. We're middle of September now. This was stuck middle of August, and you can see already how those roots are growing. Very, very satisfying. Any kind of rooting hormone, you just take a chunk off. If we're doing, say this, you'd taken this as a cutting. Don't have my pruners on me, but let's see. So you come into the greenhouse with this. What I would do is pull off this leaf, give it a fresh cut right there, dip this in some rooting hormone and stick this. So I'd stick it so that these older leaves the old leaf scars are underground, that node. If it were something very rare, you don't necessarily have to have that node. You could stick that one, and then you could also come in and stick this little piece right here, and it would probably grow. They're just that easy. So, and you can see, this was stuck in about a month ago, maybe a little less than a month ago. This one and this is a little dwarf round leaf one called Kameba. And this is one we named Linda Eggins after the collection holder in the UK, which is an extremely vigorous one. These were stuck about a week or two before this one. And you can see how those roots are already on these things. They were stuck at the same time. And it's interesting. This is a little dwarf guy, but a good grower. This is a big old honking thing. And you can see, those roots on this big one are just as vigorous as the tops are. And we had these in little cell packs, and this thing was pushing its way up out of the cell pack really easily. These, you don't need anything special. You don't need a greenhouse. Really, if you can keep the soil moist but not overly wet, you can just stick these in a pot and, put them in don't put them in a lot of light. Put them in, kind of indirect light, and they'll root. And you just get some dip and grow, hormone, whatever, rootone, whatever your rooting compound is, and they'll be just great. So I'm gonna shift.
Well, nope. I can set the camera.
Okay,
wide,
perfect.
And I can come back. Yes, perfect. Absolutely. But I love your enthusiasm, Mark. Okay, so let's do some questions. So yes. Right out of the gate, Sophia wanted to know which insects use aucubas as host plants in our region. They seem to only occasionally bloom here. And also, are the non-variegated aucubas the original one or a variant of the variegated one?
Great questions. So a lot of the aucuba will flower over winter. And, if you're not paying attention, you don't see them, see the flowers. And if they're in really heavy shade, they sometimes won't flower as well. I have seen honeybees around them, if it's warm enough out for them to be working things. That's not a native pollinator. I don't know if there are a lot of other pollinators that use them or not. I haven't really paid that much attention to that. So there's certainly pollinators. We get fruit on our aucuba, and it'll take a pollinator to move that pollen. It's not wind pollinated. So there is certainly some insects, some pollinators that are moving that pollen from one to the other. As far as the green and variegated, it seems like both can be found in the wild. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know chicken and the egg or if both are, both and. But the variegated is definitely not just a relic from cultivation. It's something that occurs down there. I think I mentioned the borealis, the variety borealis that's farther north. I don't know that I've ever seen that variegated. It seems like that northern form is not variegated. There's actually a researcher in Japan, Tetsuo, can't remember his surname, but he actually has a paper that shows where the various ones are, if they're green or spotted leaves in the Japanese islands. And if somebody is really, really interested, I think I have a copy on my computer that I could dig up.
Now that's cool because you do see the variation in the wild a lot, and it does mutate quite readily. It kind of explains why there are so many different varieties. Cool. So you did mention that they do get the canker that leads to the black shoots. Ginger would like, why does that happen? What causes that?
I probably should have looked that up before talking about aucubas. I don't know. I don't know what the causal agent is. It's I would imagine it's a fungal issue, but suppose it could be bacterial. But if you have your plant where there's some air movement and decent drainage, it seems not to happen very often. We very rarely have it here. Where I see it most is where it's like crowded up against a house or something like that. Sometimes it has been growing fine and then it has kind of outgrown its space and is and you get that. But sometimes it just happens, and I can't quite figure it out. Aucubas are easy enough to root and typically fairly inexpensive if you want to buy them, if you don't want to root it. I hate fungicides. I just do. I always say it on here, we are closer to fungi than we are to insects, and fungicides tend to be pretty nasty chemicals unless you're using something like sulfur. And so I stay away from them as much as possible. And, you just take some healthy branches and you root them and start over and rip out your plant that's dying, and don't try and treat it. It doesn't generally work anyway with Aucuba if you do try and treat it.
Yeah, for sure. I will say I went looking for some in the garden yesterday to take a picture of to include in the video, and our horticulture crew is doing an amazing job of keeping things tidy and beautiful. So was not able to find any.
Yeah, and not crowding plants is not something we're very good at. We are very good at crowding them. So yeah, that says something about them.
Yeah. Okay. So Susan asked a really interesting question. Do you need male and female of the same variety to get fruit?
You need male and female of the same species for sure. They may be able to do some crossing interspecies, but you can have a plain green leaf one, that's your male or your female, and a speckled one that's your male or female, or one that's, got a central variegation or an edge to it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't matter. I don't know if, this guy and this guy are going to be able to cross, but they might.
Sure. And something people kind of take for granted or don't necessarily understand readily is that every cultivar is genetically identical to itself. So Mr. Wonderful is a male, and it's always a male. It'll always be a male. You won't be able to have a female Mr. Wonderful because it's a genetic clone of the original Mr. Wonderful. So it's not really a question of finding ones that, are the same variety but different sexes. It's more a question of finding two varieties that flower at the same time, one being male, one being female. That's really key.
And that's something we haven't, I'm glad you said that, something we haven't really looked at. They do not all seem to flower at the same time.
Yeah.
And we haven't really tracked that. I mean, we're just really getting a handle on a lot of these, which ones are male and which ones are female, because it takes time to go out and look at them, and they're not all flowered at the same time. So,
for sure.
So you do kind of, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I need to check, and you check a handful and you got them down, and then you're like, I'll check the rest of these in 3 weeks, and you don't.
Well, like with the winterberry hollies, like it's well documented which ones flower at the same time to get berries on that. And it's just, we don't know that much about aucubas. We don't have that information just yet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're hoping to get more of that, but yeah, we don't now. And same thing with hollies. I grew at another garden, a whole collection of deciduous hollies, the winterberry hollies, all together. And I went out there, the first year I worked there, they had already been planted. And I was like, oh, this one is by far the best fruiting one. This one, and I recommended it to people. And then the next year, it was a different one that was fruiting really well. And, over time, I got to realize that what happens is when they're in flower, if it's really rainy or extra cold or whatever, either the flowers get damaged on that particular one that year, or it's raining a lot and the pollinators aren't out, you don't get good fruit that year. And the same thing happens with any plant where you have male and female. If for whatever reason pollination isn't good, fruiting isn't good.
For sure. Okie dokie. Vandy says that Hosoba Hoshifu looks just like Mr. Wonderful. Is the only difference the height?
They do look pretty similar, actually. That's a good point. They're very different habit. That Mr. Wonderful really is a low mound, whereas the Hosoba Hoshifu is much more upright. That's the main difference. I do think Hosoba Hoshifu, the leaves will get bigger. I find it the green a little bit darker, glossier green, but it's pretty nice. It's pretty close to Mr. Wonderful for sure.
Yeah, they're both great.
I agree.
If you got space for one or the other, use it.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So Judy says that she had one this summer that got pinhole with darker rimmed spots. Any thoughts on what that could be?
That sounds like, with the dots with a really well-formed circle around that sounds like some sort of shot hole fungus.
Sure.
It could be a bacterial leaf spot.
Yeah. It could be physical damage, like if it got wiggled in the wind and then had holes poked through it, just how it compartmentalized the wound on the leaf, honestly.
It could.
Yeah, lots of possibilities. We would love to see a picture of that. We maybe get a better idea what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, Carol wants to know if the different species will cross-pollinate for hybridizations.
Don't know. Mostly what has been grown in cultivation is Aucuba japonica, and we're really just getting some of these other species into Western cultivation. And they're just the other species are just green plants in the woods where they're native. They're not necessarily things that people are thinking about as landscape plants.
Yeah.
So we don't know. Is the short answer. We'd like to find out.
Absolutely. That's great. You got to love horticulture. There's just always more to learn and explore. Okay, Jared is in South Central Pennsylvania, Zone 7A. He has a Hosoba Hoshifu planted near the foundation that survived just fine, but he's planted a few more in less protected areas, so he's wondering if they will sprout back from the roots if they're killed down to the ground.
If the roots aren't killed, yes. They're not great at that, really.
Okay.
If they really go all the way down, if you have stem like this, they're usually fine unless you're going every winter. It's doing that. You can't grow them as like cut back shrubs like you would with a butterfly bush or even something like a hydrangea, which you might lose the flowers, but you could cut it to the ground every year.
Yeah.
They won't survive multiple years doing that.
That makes sense because it's an evergreen and they do go dormant, but they're still doing some base level of photosynthesis over the winter, and that does accumulate over time. So
what I've found with some plants that are kind of like that is if you're planting them like in a woodland with high shade that kind of keeps the air a little bit stiller, that will often, plants planted 10 feet apart that are kind of marginal, one in a more open spot and one in under high shade. The one under high shade will be just fine, where the one out in the open is burnt or even killed outright.
No kidding. Okay. Good tips. All right. And so one final question. Barbara would like to know, if you have to remove a plant due to canker, can you put a new Aucuba back in the same spot?
My experience has been yes, as long as you're not, putting into a real, if the soil conditions have really changed, which like I mentioned happens. You have a downspout that was running off one way and some plant has grown, or you've done something with the soil and it starts running a different way and it's right there. But otherwise, it doesn't seem to be really a root issue. It's a stem issue. So I've planted Aucuba back where they've died and not had any problem.
That's cool, because you'd want to. You put the Aucuba there in the first place because you want an Aucuba there, so it's nice that you can actually keep them there even if you start to lose them. Okay, so that is all of the questions and all of the time we had for today. So thank you so much, Mark, for pulling all this together and telling us all about these Aucubas.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
A lot of fun.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Midweek Program today. We will be back next week with Greg and Sophia. They will be talking about the perils and pleasures of planting new trees. So, of replacing old trees, excuse me. So there's that bit of flavor for you. It should be really wonderful. We will see you all next time. Y'all take care.